Everyone, and welcome. I'm so glad to have you join me today. And you have packed nonprofit calendars are the fact that you chose to be here today and spend part of your day with me really matters. My goal is to make sure that this time is really useful for you and not just interesting. Before we dive in, I want to make sure we're on the same page. I want this to be more of a conversation and not a lecture. So please feel free to use the chat throughout the webinar, whether that's to share reactions, questions, examples of things that you've done before, just anything as it comes up. I'll answer your questions at the end of the webinar, but I love to see what's resonating with you in real time. To get us started, and as people are still joining the call, because we're still right here in the first minute, I would love for you to get nice and warmed up with the chat. Is it bubbly? Thank you so much. I'm going to change my speakers. Let's see.
All right, is that better? Is the bubbly gone? Hello, everyone. Let me know if this sound is coming through better for you. Can you hear me now? Cheryl or Lydia? Yes, better. Good. Awesome. So my earbuds were not my friend today. Bubbly will be my new word for it. I appreciate that. Thank you all so much for the feedback. If you're in a webinar and you can't hear me, that kind of defeats the purpose. So as I was saying, I appreciate you being here today and spending time with me. I know how busy you all are as nonprofit professionals. And so to take some of your day and spend it with me, I'm very grateful. So I want to be clear as we jump in that I would love for this to be more of a conversation. There's my voice getting bubbly now. And not a lecture. So please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A function to drop your questions, your reactions, examples of things that you've done before. And I'll get to your questions at the end, but I love to see what's resonating with you in real time as we're working through the content. So as I started to say, to help us all to get really comfortable using that chat feature, if you'll go ahead and drop for me where you are joining us from today. City, state, home office, kitchen table, wherever you are, it all counts. I am here today from beautiful Cartersville, Georgia. I love where I get to live and work. We're about 45 minutes northwest of Atlanta. Perfect placement to get to Atlanta and all the great things it has, but far enough away to not deal with the traffic that I fought for years and years as a nonprofit executive driving into town every day. Oh, Canton, Georgia. I used to live in Canton. That's a beautiful city here too. In Dallas. Hi, Peyton from San Francisco Bay. Thank you all so much. Cheryl from Black Mountain, Los Angeles. Kennesaw and Marietta just down the road from me. Hebron, Connecticut. I had the opportunity to visit Connecticut in October and it was beautiful. Definitely a fall vibe that I miss here in Northwest Georgia that we don't get as much as I would like. Hey, Natasha, good to see you. Thank you for joining. Hey, Abby. All right. So one of the things that I do in my webinars, keep it coming. I love to see where you're from. Oh, Argentina. Amazing. Peru. That's awesome. Oh, my goodness. Those might be the furthest I've had people join me from. That's so exciting. I love that we can officially say that this webinar is now international. So one of the things I do on the webinar is I join you and welcome you and say hello to you on the camera, and then I turn it off because it's distracting for me to see my little face bobbing there in the corner. So I'm going to turn my camera off and we're going to jump right into this content. So here's where we're headed together today. In the next 45 to 50 minutes, I'm going to show you how I personally use ChatGPT as a grant assistant, not a replacement for grant writing and for nonprofit professionals. Then we'll talk about something that's really important, the difference between assistive AI and generative AI. A lot of nonprofit anxiety around AI comes from not separating these two. We'll get very clear about what AI can actually help with in grant work, what it should never touch, and why those boundaries matter for ethics, compliance, and credibility. We'll also talk about common mistakes I see when people try to use AI too fast and how to avoid them. And finally, I'm going to introduce some custom GPTs, something that I didn't even know existed until recently, and why they've helped me bring consistency and calm into my workflow. My goal is that every slide today gives you something you can apply or think about differently. Before we go any further, I'd love to just briefly introduce myself. My name is Melanie Lambert. I'm founder and managing director of Just Right Grants. I get the privilege of working with nonprofits across the country on grant strategy, research, cultivation, and writing. I've worked with very small organizations where one person is doing everything, and with larger organizations juggling dozens of deadlines at once. I love this work. I'm one of those crazy people that actually enjoys asking people for money when it supports something I'm passionate about. And a fun fact about me, I'm a mom of 3 boys, which means I am very familiar with interruptions, competing priorities, and the need for systems that actually work in real life. That personal reality shapes how I think about tools. If something only works in a perfect, quiet, uninterrupted environment, that is not realistic for me. And I've never worked in a pure bubble in any of the nonprofits I work for, so I totally get it. So before we get into tools or tactics, I want to talk about why this conversation matters right now and what this session is and isn't meant to be. Here's what I hear most often from nonprofit professionals right now. It's not, we don't know how to write grants. It's, we're overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by the volume of opportunities, the pace of deadlines, the pressure to be competitive, and the constant feeling of being behind. Then AI enters the picture. And instead of relief, it creates more questions. People ask, are we allowed to use this? Will funders think we're cheating? Are we risking something we don't fully understand? This conversation matters because nonprofits are already operating at capacity, and uncertainty adds weight. In this session, I'm going to show you how I use ChatGPT as a tool, specifically as a kind of virtual assistant that helps reduce cognitive load. Not just in grant writing itself, but in staying organized, reviewing information, and handling the many administrative and preparatory tasks that surround the entire grant process. What I'm not going to do today, and what I want to be very clear about, is show you how to use ChatGPT to do the work for you or to replace your professional judgment. And that's intentional. Grant writing is not just filling in answers. It's strategy, it's interpretation, it's understanding funder psychology, reading between the lines, and making judgment calls that require context and experience. When AI is positioned as a replacement instead of a support tool, it creates risk, not just for grant professionals, but for the nonprofits themselves. It can send the message that this work is fully automatable, when in reality, the most successful proposals still depend on human insight, voice, and relationship building. And the downstream impact of that kind of thinking is real. Applications start to sound generic, funders disengage, and organizations struggle to stand out in increasingly competitive funding environments. So my goal today is the opposite. I want to show you how responsible, assistive use of AI can protect the quality of your work, reinforce the value of human expertise, and help you do your job more sustainably without cutting corners or compromising integrity. As you're taking notes today, I want you to write down one part of your grant process that feels heavier than it should. That's usually where support belongs. And if you feel like sharing that in the chat, it might prompt somebody else to think of it that way at their organization too. That framing leads directly into one of the most important distinctions we'll make today: the difference between using AI as support versus treating it like a replacement. Now let's talk about one of the biggest fear points I hear on both sides of this conversation. For grant writers and nonprofit professionals, the fear is often, is AI going to replace me? And for funders, the fear is just as real. Are we about to start reading nothing but dry, automated, generic proposals that all sound the same? Those fears are valid, and they come from imagining AI in the wrong role. So I want to be very clear about how I think about this. ChatGPT is my assistant, not my grant writer. I don't ask it to decide for me. I don't ask it to write final language. And I absolutely don't ask it to replace my judgment. What I ask it to do is to help me to get unstuck. Let me give you a very real example. If I'm reviewing an RFP late in the day, maybe it's the 5th one I've looked at that week, my brain is already tired. And what slows me down isn't the writing, it's the setup. I'm spending time just trying to figure out who is actually eligible, what they truly fund, not what sounds good in the overview, and whether this is even realistic for my client before I invest hours of work. That part of grant work is necessary, but it's also mentally draining. That's where AI helps me. I'll ask ChatGPT to summarize eligibility requirements, pull out funding priorities, and flag anything that looks like a red flag, so I can apply my judgment faster and more clearly. The responsibility never leaves me. And that's the important distinction for funders too. When AI is used as a replacement, you end up with writing that's generic, flattened, disconnected from your real communities, and frankly, it's boring to read. But when AI is used as an assistant, it actually protects the human voice because the writer has more time and energy to focus on storytelling, strategy, clarity, and alignment. Remember, funders don't fund efficiency. They fund understanding, intention, and impact. And that doesn't come from a tool. So if you're worried about AI replacing grant writers or worried about AI ruining the quality of proposals, the answer isn't avoiding AI altogether. The answer is keeping it in the right role. AI removes friction. Humans keep responsibility. And that's the line I don't cross, and the one that I encourage you to hold on to as well. To put this into practice, pick one task on your plate right now where you feel stuck or drained and ask, could an assistant help me prepare for this without deciding anything? Once you understand that assistant mindset, it becomes much easier to talk about the types of AI use and why some uses feel risky while others feel genuinely helpful. When people hear the phrase AI in grant writing, most of us picture the same thing. We imagine a robot sitting at a keyboard, writing a full proposal, hitting submit, and moving on to the next one. And that mental image should make you nervous because that's generative AI used as a replacement. And in grant work, that's where things can go wrong very quickly. So let's slow down and define terms because clarity here changes everything. Generative AI is designed to create content. Its job is to produce text that sounds complete, polished, and confident. That can be useful in some contexts, but in grant writing, that's also where risk lives. Generative AI can sound convincing even when it's wrong. It can fill in gaps that shouldn't be filled, and it can smooth over uncertainty instead of surfacing it. That's why people worry. And honestly, that's why funders worry too. Now let's contrast that with what I actually use. Assistive AI is different. Assistive AI doesn't exist to replace thinking. It exists to support thinking. It helps you organize information, summarize long or complex material, surface patterns, gaps, or questions, and reduce cognitive load so you can make better decisions. Think of assistive AI less like a writer and more like a very fast, very organized research assistant. Here's how I keep the distinction clear in my own work. I never ask ChatGPT to finish something for me. I ask it to help me understand what I'm looking at, clarify what's missing, get unstuck when my brain is tired, prepare so I can do the real work well. Here's a simple gut check I use all the time, and you can use it too. If the AI output looks polished enough to submit as is, that's a problem. That means it's crossed into replacement territory. But if the output helps me think more clearly, helps me ask better questions, or helps me organize my next steps, that's the sweet spot. For example, I might ask assistive AI to summarize eligibility requirements, pull out key priorities from an RFP, list clarifying questions I should ask internally, or identify sections of a proposal that need stronger evidence. What I don't ask it to do is to decide whether we're going to apply, to write final narrative language, or to invent outcomes, data, or a community voice. Those decisions and that writing stay human every time. So if you're feeling uneasy about AI, I want to offer this reframe. The problem isn't AI itself. The problem is imagining it in the wrong role. When AI is used as a replacement, it creates risk. When AI is used as an assistant, it creates clarity. And clarity is what protects both your work and your professional judgment. That's the distinction I build everything else on. So the next time you use AI, run the gut check. Does this help me think, or does it try to finish the work for me? So if we're clear on assistive versus generative AI, the next step is setting boundaries, because boundaries are what actually make this safe. Let's talk about these boundaries, because this is where a lot of nonprofit professionals feel either relieved or overwhelmed. When AI conversations go off the rails, it's usually not because someone had bad intentions. It's because there weren't clear boundaries. And I want to say this plainly. Avoiding AI altogether is not what makes grant work safe. Clear boundaries are what makes it safe. So let's walk through what that actually looks like in practice. There are several areas where AI can genuinely help without crossing ethical or professional lines. AI can help with summarizing long RFPs. If you've ever opened a 25 to 30 page set of guidelines and thought, I don't even know where to start, this is a great use case. It can help with pulling out eligibility requirements and funding priorities, so you're not hunting through dense text trying to answer basic questions. It can help with creating checklists, breaking a complex application into manageable pieces so nothing gets missed. And it can help with organizing notes and ideas, especially when you're juggling multiple programs, funders, or deadlines at the same time. All of that is support work. None of it replaces your judgment. So let's just be just as clear as about where the line is. AI should never write final grant narratives. It should never invent outcomes, data, partnerships, or community voice. It should never replace program expertise, especially when that expertise lives with staff, participants, or communities. And it should never serve as a source of truth. This part matters more than people realize. AI is very good at sounding confident, even when it's wrong. I once reviewed a proposal draft where AI-generated outcomes were included, and those outcomes weren't real. They sounded reasonable, they were well-written, they were completely fabricated. That's not efficiency. That's risk. And it's also exactly what funders are afraid of when they worry about AI. Funders don't want to read proposals that are technically polished but disconnected from reality. They want to understand real programs, real needs, and real impact. That only happens when humans stay responsible for accuracy, voice, strategy, and truth. So if you're wondering, how do I know if I'm using AI responsibly? Here's a simple way to think about it. If AI is helping you prepare, organize, and think, you're likely in a safe zone. If AI is starting to decide, assert, and create facts, you've probably crossed a line. Boundaries don't slow you down. They protect your work, your credibility, and your professional judgment. And once those boundaries are clear, AI becomes a tool, not a risk. So here's an action item for you. Write down one boundary you want to hold firm, something AI will never be used for in your work. When those boundaries are in place, something interesting happens. The benefits show up not in speed, but in capacity. You may have heard me say that I reclaimed somewhere between 300 and 400 hours last year for Just Right grants using ChatGPT as my assistant. And I want to be very clear about what that actually looked like in real life. That time didn't come from writing faster. It didn't come from lowering standards. And it definitely didn't come from cutting corners. It came from reducing cognitive load. Let me give you a very honest snapshot of what this used to look like for me. So pick any random Tuesday afternoon. Tuesdays are my meeting days, and they can be rather chaotic. So I've been on back-to-back calls already. I have maybe a 90-minute window before school pickup, and I have an open RFP that I know that I've read at least twice. But I can't remember who's eligible, whether there's a matching requirement, or if this funder allows operating support. So I start scrolling again, and I'm scrolling, and I'm rereading sections I've already read. I'm jumping back and forth between the pages. I'm mentally trying to hold deadlines, attachments, and internal questions all at once. And by the time I finally reorient myself, half of my energy is gone, and I haven't written a single word. That's cognitive load. The biggest drains on my time weren't the moments of focused writing. They were the repetitive, mentally exhausting tasks that happen around the writing. Things like rereading that same RFP over and over, rebuilding outlines from scratch, staring at a blank page, knowing what I want to say, but not knowing where to start, carrying everything in my head instead of having a system hold it for me. That's where AI changed things, not by doing the thinking for me, but by helping me set the table. Now, instead of rereading an RFP for the third time, I can ask my assistant to summarize key requirements and flag anything that matters. Instead of staring at a blank page, I can start with a clear outline. Instead of holding everything mentally, I can focus on the part of the work that actually requires me, strategy, voice, and judgment. So when I say AI didn't lower my standards, it lowered friction. That's exactly what I mean. It removed unnecessary barriers between me and the work that matters most. And that matters, especially when you're already stretched thin. Because nonprofit professionals don't need to work faster. They need systems that make the work sustainable. That's what responsible AI use supports. Not speed for speed's sake, but capacity that protects quality and sanity. Moving forward, you can put this into practice by identifying one repetitive task you do every week that drains your energy but doesn't require creativity. That's a prime candidate for AI support. Let me make this concrete by showing you how this actually shows up in my day-to-day work. This slide is where things usually start to feel a little bit more concrete for people. Because up until now, we've been talking about concepts and boundaries, and now I want to show you how that actually shows up in my day-to-day workflow. Let me start with this very real scenario. I will often get an RFP forwarded to me with a note that says something like, can you take a look at this? No context, no recommendation, just a deadline and a PDF. In the past, that meant sitting down and reading the entire document front to back just to answer basic questions like, are we even eligible? Does this align with our program? And is this realistic given the timeline and the requirements? That's where I bring ChatGPT in before I make any decisions. So on your screen, you'll see the exact type of prompt I use for RFP review, and you can use this immediately in your own work. Summarize this RFP for eligibility, funding priorities, deadlines, required attachments, and red flags. If information is missing, say not stated. Do not recommend whether we should apply. That last line is doing a lot of work because what I'm saying to the tool is, you can organize information for me, but you don't get to decide. This is how I think about prompts. Prompts aren't just instructions, they're guardrails. They tell the tool what it's allowed to do, what it's not allowed to do, and where human judgment stays in control. When I get the output back, I'm not looking for an answer. I'm looking for clarity. I want to see at a glance, are there eligibility issues we need to flag? Are the priorities a strong or weak match? Are there attachments or requirements that could create a bottleneck here? And is there anything that raises an immediate red flag? From there, I make the decision about next steps. This approach does two really important things. First, it saves time, because I'm not rereading the same sections over and over just to reorient myself. Second, and most importantly, it protects my judgment. That's the theme today. I'm still the one deciding whether an opportunity is worth pursuing. I'm still responsible for strategy and alignment, and I'm still accountable for the outcome. The AI is doing what assistants do best, organizing information so I can think clearly. And once you start thinking about prompts this way, as guardrails instead of commands, AI becomes a lot less scary and a lot more useful. Later, I'll show you what this looks like when it's saved as a repeatable assistant and in what OpenAI calls a custom GPT. But first, let's put this into practice. After the webinar, pull down any RFP from grants.gov or use one you've been considering from any funder. Use the RFP review prompt exactly as it's written here once, and you'll get this in the download too, so you don't have to scramble to scribble this down. Put it in the prompt or use this prompt and tell it not to decide anything, and then notice how much mental energy it saves you before you even started thinking strategically. Before you dive into this full steam ahead on your own, I want to flag a few common mistakes I see, not because people are careless, but because they're tired. Let's slow down for a minute. This slide is really about grace as much as it is about risk. Most AI mistakes I see in grant writing aren't malicious. They're not about trying to cut corners or to deceive funders. They're rushed. People are tired. We're under-resourced. We're juggling so much and we just want a little bit of relief, right? It's completely understandable. The problem isn't usually the using of AI. It's using it before we've slowed down enough to think. Risk shows up when speed starts to replace judgment. That's when things like this happen. Outputs get copied without being fully reviewed. Confident sounding language masks uncertainty. Details get accepted because they sound right. Context gets lost because the tool wasn't given enough information. And none of that happens because someone doesn't care. It happens because nonprofit work doesn't leave a lot of margin for slow thinking. So this slide isn't about telling you not to use AI. It's about reminding you to build in one critical pause. Before you use an AI output, ask, does this reflect what I actually know to be true? Can I trace this back to a real source? Would I feel comfortable explaining this to a funder? If the answer to any of those is not quite, that's your cue to slow down, not to stop entirely. Responsible AI use isn't about being perfect. It's about staying intentional when things feel rushed. And when judgment stays in the driver's seat, AI stays a tool, not a liability. If you take away nothing else from this slide except this, I'll be happy. Build yourself one pause. Before you copy and paste anything from AI, ask yourself if you'd be comfortable explaining it that way to a funder. Those mistakes are avoidable, especially if you pause long enough to ask the right questions up front. So this is where I want us to shift from interest to intention. Because one of those biggest mistakes organizations make with AI isn't choosing the wrong tool. It's adopting a tool without any shared understanding of how it's supposed to be used. AI doesn't just require access, right? We can all access some level of AI. It requires governance. And governance doesn't have to be complicated or bureaucratic. It just means asking the right questions before everyone starts experimenting on their own. Before adopting any AI tool, even if it's informally, these questions really matter. First, what problem are we trying to solve? This one sounds obvious, but it's often skipped. Are you trying to save time on RFP review? Are you trying to reduce overwhelm around deadlines? Or do you have support staff who are new to grant work? If the problem isn't clear, the tool is not going to help you. It's just going to add noise. Next, who validates the output? This is one of the most important questions on the slide. Someone, a role, not necessarily a person, needs to be responsible for reviewing AI output before it's used in grant work. If everyone assumes someone else is checking, no one is checking. And that's where risk sneaks in. Then ask, what information should never be entered? This is about protecting your organization. Things like confidential program data, personal information about your participants, donor or funder communications, anything that you wouldn't feel comfortable explaining later. This doesn't mean that AI is off limits. It just means that some information is. Next, how does this fit our existing process? AI works best when it supports what you're already doing, not when it creates a parallel system that no one owns. Ask yourself, where does AI show up in the workflow? At what point does a human step back in? What happens after the AI output is produced? And finally, where do humans still lead? This question is a non-negotiable. Humans should always lead on strategy, judgment, final writing, and relationship building. AI can support these things, but it should not replace them. Let me share a quick example of why this matters. I've seen organizations roll out AI informally, meaning one staff member uses it for summaries, another uses it for drafts, and another just avoids it altogether. There's no shared expectations. There's no boundaries. No one clearly responsible for validation. And eventually someone asks, wait a minute, where did this language come from? That's the moment governance becomes urgent instead of intentional. So here's the red flag I want you to remember from this slide. If no one owns validation, that's your red flag. AI doesn't need to be scary, but it does need to be stewarded. When these questions are answered up front, AI becomes a support tool that strengthens your work instead of complicating it. So before you move forward, at least answer these two questions internally. Who validates output and what never goes into AI? Those alone reduce your risk. And asking those questions helps reinforce something I want to be very clear about. There are parts of this work where humans still lead. This slide is really the heart of the entire conversation. At the end of the day, grant funding is still a human decision. Funders don't fund tools. They don't fund platforms. They don't fund automation. They fund people and the work those people are doing in real communities. That's why these 4 things still matter more than anything else in grant work, and you should have noticed by now are the overlying thread of this entire presentation. Strategy, knowing which opportunities are worth pursuing and which ones aren't. Judgment, making thoughtful decisions when guidelines are unclear, priorities conflict, or resources are limited. Writing, not just technically correct writing, but writing that reflects lived experience, organizational voice, and purpose. And relationships, understanding funders, building trust over time, and knowing how to communicate beyond the application itself. Those are human skills, and they're still the reason funders say yes. Let me give you a simple example of what I mean. I've worked with organizations that technically checked every box in every application, but something felt off. The narrative was polished, but it lacked specificity. It didn't sound like it came from a real place. Funders noticed that. On the other hand, I've seen proposals that weren't perfect on paper, but they were deeply grounded in reality. Clear strategy, honest language, strong alignment. Those proposals stand out. And that's exactly what funders are afraid of losing when they worry about AI. They're not worried about efficiency. They're worried about authenticity. That's why I'm so firm about this boundary. AI can support strong teams. It can help with preparation, organization, and clarity. But it cannot replace context, lived experience, professional judgment, or genuine relationships. And it shouldn't try to. When AI is used responsibly, it protects these human elements because it frees you up to spend more time where you matter the most. So if you take nothing else from today, take this. Using AI doesn't make grant work less human unless we let it. Our job is to keep people at the center. And when we do that, tools stay in their place as support, not substitutes. As you think about how you'll use AI at your nonprofit, name the part of your grant work that only you can do. Protect your time there. So what does all this mean practically, and depending on where your organization is right now? This slide is really about permission. Because once people start understanding how AI could fit into the grant work, the next question is, so what does this mean for us? And the honest answer is, it depends. There is no one right level of AI use. Some organizations genuinely enjoy experimenting internally. They have the time, the interest, and the internal capacity to test tools, refine prompts, and build their own guardrails. Others quickly realize something different. They look at their workload and think, we don't actually want to manage this on top of everything else. And that's not failure, that's clarity. Let me share a quick example. I've worked with organizations that were very excited about AI at first. They tried a few tools, ran a few experiments, and then realized the real work wasn't using AI, it was overseeing it. Deciding who uses it, making sure outputs are accurate, ensuring consistency across staff, and protecting that voice and quality. That's real work. And for some organizations, the most responsible choice is saying, we want support with the human side of this. Knowing where you want support and where you don't is a strength. It shows that you understand your capacity, your risk tolerance, and your priorities. Whether your organization chooses to experiment internally, use AI very selectively, or rely on outside support, the goal is the same: protecting the integrity of your work while reducing unnecessary strain on your team. AI is absolutely not a requirement, but it is an option. And thoughtful choices, not just trendy ones, are what serve organizations best in the long run. So right now, as you consider AI for your nonprofit, decide whether your next step is experimentation, restraint, or support, because clarity is the win. For some organizations, this clarity leads to experimentation. For others, it leads to a different realization that they don't want to manage this alone. I want to take just a minute here before we get into questions and instant downloads and going through the GPTs and talk to you just a little bit about Just Right Grants, and more importantly, why it exists. At Just Right Grants, we focus on the human side of grant work. We don't sell shortcuts. We don't automate grant writing. We don't believe tools can replace expertise. What we do believe in is supporting people who are already doing hard, important work and helping them do it more strategically and sustainably. Our work centers on grant strategy, deciding what's worth pursuing and why, research, identifying opportunities that actually align, cultivation, helping organizations build thoughtful funder relationships, and writing clear, accurate, human-led proposals that reflect real programs and real communities. We absolutely use systems. We use tools. We use AI responsibly, just like I've been sharing with you today. But those tools always sit underneath human judgment, experience, and accountability. For many of the organizations we work with, the real challenge isn't learning how to use AI. It's realizing that they don't want to manage the oversight, validation, consistency, and risk on top of everything else they're already carrying. So if this webinar so far has resonated because you found yourself thinking, I don't want to figure out all of this on my own, that's exactly the kind of conversation we're happy to have. No pressure, no hard sell, just an honest discussion about what support could look like from Just Right Grants and whether it's a good fit. Because at the end of the day, strong grant work isn't about having the newest tools. It's about having the right people, the right systems, and the right support in place. And that's where Just Right Grants comes in, when and if it makes sense for you. Whether you do this internally or with support, one of the biggest shifts for me came when I stopped thinking about one tool and started thinking about roles. I want to introduce an idea here that was honestly a turning point for me. And I say this as someone who uses ChatGPT every day. I didn't even know custom GPTs existed until fairly recently. And when I first heard about them, my reaction wasn't excitement. It was, I don't have time to learn something new. But once I understood what they actually were, it clicked. Up until that point, I was treating ChatGPT like one big general tool, asking it to do a little bit of everything here and there. And that's when things can start to feel messy. One conversation for RFP review, another one for outlining, another one for internal notes, all with different context, different expectations, and different results. Custom GPTs changed that. Once I understood what they actually were, it clicked. Instead of one tool trying to do everything, often inconsistently, I could set up assistants that do one specific thing well. Think of it less like a robot and more like assigning roles. One assistant for reviewing RFPs, another one for organizing grant timelines, another one for helping surface strategy questions before writing begins. Each one has a clear purpose, clear boundaries, and clear instructions about what it should and shouldn't do. And that reduced chaos immediately. Not because it automated my work, but because it brought consistency to it. I wasn't re-explaining my expectations every time. I wasn't starting from scratch. And I wasn't worried about the tool drifting into areas it shouldn't. This is where AI started to feel like a true assistant instead of a wild card. And the reason I wanted to introduce this before the download is because I want you to understand the concept first. We're going to be on this slide for just a minute, so get comfortable and grab your coffee. Custom GPTs aren't about being more technical. They're about being more intentional. They help you decide what kind of support you want, where boundaries live, and how to protect the human parts of your work. So let me pause for a second and explain what a custom GPT actually is in plain language. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's just the name for the kind of AI model that ChatGPT is built on. A GPT is not a robot, and it's not a new piece of software you have to install. It's a system within ChatGPT that's been trained on a lot of different examples of how people use language. And it responds by predicting what words are most likely to come next based on what you ask. It doesn't understand meaning the way humans do, and it doesn't think or reason on its own. It looks at your prompt. It recognizes patterns from what it's learned, and it generates a response that sounds human because it's following those patterns. That's why how you ask the question or what instructions you give it matters so much. The output is only as good as the direction it's given. Think of a custom GPT as a saved set of instructions you give ChatGPT so it behaves consistently. Instead of explaining your expectations every single time, like what you want help with, what you don't want touched, where the boundaries are, you write those rules once. After that, every time you use that GPT, it follows the same role, the same tone, and the same limits. So rather than starting from a blank conversation every time, you're essentially opening a conversation with an assistant that already knows its job. On the next slide, I'll show you how this translates into something you actually can use, but I wanted you to see the why before the how. Before we move forward, I ask you to start thinking about AI and GPTs in roles, not features. If you could have one assistant to do one job well, what would that be? To make this practical, I didn't want to just talk about these ideas. I want to give you something that you can build on. This is the point where I want to make this really practical for you. I just launched our instant download called Build Your Own Grant Assistant GPTs. This guide walks you step by step through how to create sample GPTs that you can customize for your own role, your own organization, and your own workflow. You don't need to be technical, you don't need to be an AI expert, and you don't need to build everything at once. The goal of this download isn't to turn you into a power user overnight. It's to give you clear, responsible starting points. Each example GPT in the guide is designed to do one specific job, things like reviewing RFPs, organizing grant timelines, preparing strategy questions, and supporting pre-writing and planning. Not writing proposals, not making decisions, not filling in facts. And that brings me to an important reminder, one that I want to say out loud, even though it's also written on the slide. These GPTs are designed to support organization and thinking. They do not replace professional judgment, final writing, compliance review, or subject matter expertise. Think of them as the assistants that help you set the table, not the decision makers that tell you what to serve. If you keep that frame in mind, this becomes a really powerful tool, one that reduces overwhelm without sacrificing quality or integrity. This guide is meant to be something you can use immediately, adapt slowly, and revisit as your comfort grows. There's no pressure to do everything at once. Responsible use isn't about being perfect. It's about being intentional. And that's really been the through line of everything we've talked about today. So if you only choose one GPT from the guide and stop there this week, you're already ahead of where you were last week. That's using the tools and the resources at your disposal. That's a lot to take in. So let's pause here and we're going to hear some questions that have come up from you. I'm going to go back over here to the chat. I'm going to try to get as many of these as I can. We run a little bit longer on time than I initially planned because of my little technical hiccup there at the beginning. But here we are. If you do need to jump off, I'm going to answer one of the questions. You will get a copy of the slides and the recording as well as the download after our session. Those will be sent out via email tomorrow. If you don't get that or you have any challenges with access, please feel free to email me and I will get that right to you. Okay. Yep. There's a question on, yep. Be careful what you hand over. That's a great point. We talked about that a little bit, but you've got to be the safeguard of your information. Let's see. Let's look at some other questions. Let me scroll up here. All right. Hang on, everybody. We've got a couple more information. Anybody who wants to add any additional questions? Some of the questions that I get a lot are, are funders actually okay with AI being used? It's probably the most common question I get. And the short answer is typically yes. Funders are generally okay with AI being used responsibly, right? Like we talked about, they don't want things to be misrepresented. They don't want fabricated data. They don't want those generic templated proposals or the content that doesn't really fit with your community or their requirements. They know that you're using these tools. What they care about in your proposal is whether it's accurate, specific, and reflects your real programs. I've had some applications here recently that have actually had a disclosure in the application itself that says, we understand you're using AI. Tell us whether you're using assistive or generative AI. And they've said in it, it doesn't disqualify you. We just are kind of tracking who's using AI for the applications. So there's still, which I appreciate, because what that does is it gives me permission to use the tools and resources that we have at our disposal that are honestly being used by our for-profit counterparts. And so it gives us that permission, but it also lets me know that they're still looking at my answers strategically and making sure that they align well and that we're presenting ourselves uniquely. How are we unique? If we're all using AI and spitting out the same generic proposals, nobody's going to jump to the top of the application stack, right? So that's where we have to be careful. But I do appreciate funders that are asking that question. Initially, it kind of scared me, right? I'm like, oh gosh, I'm going to check this box and they're going to be like, I'm going to be honest and, forthcoming. And they're going to be like, no, we're kicking you out of the mix. But they were forthcoming as well. As this is not going to prevent your application from moving forward. And I was honest about it. We used assistive AI in that application. For one of the questions that Caroline has, it's a great one for character and word counts. Guys, that is the number one way to use it. Now, make sure that you don't have information that you wouldn't want shared. But we do draft a lot of content for our clients ahead of time, and then we customize it for every application. Well, if you can't tell by the fact that we're running a little bit over on this webinar, I love words. I'm verbose. I love to talk about our clients and be passionate about what they're doing. So if I, have a very well-written section about a program that our clients have, and then I have to shorten that to 500 words, it can be crippling for me, right? I could stare at the screen for hours trying to do that. Or I could ask ChatGPT to use the exact same context that I have in this paragraph and shorten it to 500 words or 1,000 characters or whatever the limit is. And it can do it in seconds. So that's really where there's value in it, right? What's going to be a speed bump for you in this process that you can save yourself the time while still having a human element involved and your specific expertise. Corey has asked, have you run into government proposals that do not restrict AI? Not yet. We actually worked on one with a client in November that encouraged it because the funding was for AI technology. So I have not seen that yet. But that's a good thing to start thinking about. Corey, if you have, let me know, because I'd be interested to see what they say in that. And then can you help? What help can you ask? I can't read anymore. What help can you ask ChatGPT the right and necessary questions to thoroughly complete the requirements? Tanya, that is a great question. I'm happy to go through that with you if there's specific things, because you do want to make sure that you're using content you've already generated, right? That's kind of the key. Everything that I'm asking ChatGPT to help me with is content that I've already drafted. So I've written something and I say, I want this to highlight this aspect of what we do, but I'm stuck, right? I've rewritten this 3 times and I still can't get my point across. ChatGPT can help you do that. As I said, think of it as like an assistant sitting next to you that's saying, have you thought about it from this angle? And so it's still your original content. And that's the difference. I think somebody asked earlier in the assistive versus generative. I'm not saying write my program description. I'm saying here's my program description that I've written. Help me to highlight how we help low-income students with after-school programming, right? So I'm being very specific and intentional about what I'm asking it to do with the content that I've already written. How do you prevent it from oversharing information about the organization? So that lives with you. Consider that everything that you put on ChatGPT is open to the world. You have got to protect your donor information. You've got to protect proprietary information. So if you wouldn't put it on your website, don't put it on ChatGPT. That's basically it, because it's open. It's called open AI for a reason. And consider that any of that can be source material for other people using it. So that's where the responsibility lives with you. Thanks, Corey. I appreciate that. Let's stay in touch about that if you've got federal agencies that are restricting AI. So listen, if you've got other questions for me, I would love to connect with you after. I always go through the questions to make sure that if I missed anything in the chat function, that I'll respond directly to you. So feel free to continue to drop those in there. If you've let this sort of marinate over the next couple of days and you're like, gosh, I wish Melanie had gotten to this specific question, feel free to send me an email. I'm always available. I love talking shop and I'm here to be helpful, right? Because, when we all do this collectively better, the industry wins, right? So one of the things that we kept coming back to today over and over again is intentional choice. There isn't one right next move after a conversation like this. There's a few different paths and all of them are valid. One option is to take what you learned today and experiment thoughtfully. Maybe you start an RFP review. Maybe you build one simple assistant. Maybe you just change how you think about AI, even if you don't use it right away. That's still progress. Another option is to follow along with Just Right Grants for more resources. We regularly share guidance, examples, practical insights for nonprofits and grant writers who want to work more sustainably, whether that's about AI, grant strategy, or capacity building. And a third option for those who are ready, let's have a conversation. It's not a sales call. It's not a pitch. Just a conversation to talk through where you are right now, what feels heavy or unclear, and whether support from Just Right Grants could make sense for your nonprofit. If the answer is no, that's okay. I'll see you in our next webinar. If the answer is yes, let's talk about what that could look like. What matters most is this. You don't have to do everything at once. You don't have to use every tool, and you don't have to figure it all out alone unless you want to. Support isn't about dependency. It's about alignment, and you get to choose what that looks like. So as we wrap up today, I just want to say thank you, truly. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for showing up curious and thoughtful and having a really nuanced conversation and asking great questions about AI and grant work. And thank you for the work you do every day at your organizations and your communities. Nonprofit work is hard, y'all. It's complex, it's demanding, and it often asks people to carry more than they reasonably should. That's really been the heart of this webinar. Today wasn't about convincing you to use a tool. It's about reminding you that people still matter most and that tools should support the people doing the work, not replace them or exhaust them further. If you take one thing with you, I hope it's this. You're allowed to look for ways to work more sustainably without compromising your values, your integrity, or the human side of your work. Before you go, I would love to invite you to stay connected with us at Just Right Grants. As I shared, we offer free webinars like this every month, focused on practical, real-world grant strategy, capacity building, and responsible use of tools, all designed with busy nonprofit schedules in mind. We also offer a few low-cost paid trainings for organizations and grant professionals who want to go a little bit deeper, like our Grant Writing Bootcamp, which is a 6-part on-demand online workshop, and our Grant Writing Jumpstart. It's a done-for-you grant writing package that includes grant narrative composition, grant research, and a custom grant calendar to help you jumpstart your grant writing fundraising strategy right now. It'd work really well with the download you got today. Both of these are designed to be time respectful, budget friendly, and immediately useful, not overwhelming. If you're not already on our email list, I encourage you to sign up for our e-newsletter so you don't miss those webinars, trainings, and resources. And of course, follow us on social media. We're on all the big ones to stay in the loop and continue the conversation. However you choose to move forward, whether that's experimenting on your own, joining us again, or reaching out for support from one of our team of experts, I'm really glad you were part of this conversation today. Thank you again for your time, your thoughtfulness, and the work you do. Take care. I hope to see you again soon.